My Adventures with Superman returns for a second season on Adult Swim with a great 2-episode premiere that picks up a lot of the threads from the first season in the first episode, More Things in Heaven and Earth. Clark continues to have more visions about his biological father and the strange ship, and they all might just be tied to the arrival of another Kryptonian ship touching down on Earth during a meteorite strike. Clark, Lois and Jimmy are sent to cover the story for the Daily Planet once finding out about the ship thanks to Hank Henshaw, and once we arrive in the snowy wastes of the Arctic, the episode actually moves at kind of a breakneck speed, almost to a point where it's a little too fast with the amount of stuff that it covers, as Clark is sucked back into the vision-like space by Jor-El, who finally begins to talk English, settling a lot of the things that happened in that season 1 finale straight. And we find out that the big Kryptonian ship that was coming to Earth that Clark thought was full of Kryptonians that want to destroy the Earth was actually a derelict ghost ship on autopilot and only had the robots in it and were activated because of him. The entire episode does feel like it should have been in the first season. It should have been that last episode of the first season, especially because the way this episode ends as well is a very much sort of like a setup for a second season, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the speed that this episode gets going once it hits that snowy tundra setting is just, it's a little bit too much almost. It just keeps moving and moving and moving and moving, and while that's good, it keeps, you know, the tension up and everything because they're inside this ship and it's like activating and it's shifting in the snow, so, you know, parts of it are falling off and Jimmy and Lois are there and they can get hurt while Clark is off doing stuff with Jor-El. It just feels like it's just moving a bit too fast and it should have just pared back a little bit, and that's why I think it was probably meant to be the last episode of the first season, since it feels like a finale or like the culmination of all the stories we had up until, you know, a last episode of a season. If you've seen any of the marketing for the second season of the show, they are heavily teasing Supergirl this season, and right from the get-go they make it known that Clark has a cousin and she survived Krypton's destruction as well. I actually really applaud this. I like that they're not sort of hamstringing it out and just, you know, feeding us bits over the season. They're just getting straight into it. He's got a cousin, you know, there's no, you know, umming and ahhing about, oh, is it actually Kara? Is it a different Kryptonian? Are they related? Are they not related? They're just getting that out of the way right now. And I suppose they probably have to do that for some people who might not know that Supergirl is his cousin, because then I could see them be like, oh, then they'll get Superman and Supergirl together in a romantic relationship. I could see why they're doing that for the general audiences. They might not know that, so it's good that they're getting that out of the way right now. Jor-El also gives us a bit of backstory on Krypton's destruction, and it wasn't the usual natural disaster that he and some other people knew about and tried to go to the council with, but they weren't interested and kind of fobbed him off and everything, and then they sort of welcomed their own destruction. Here we actually learn that Krypton was highly militaristic and in all-out war with a race that we don't actually see, but from how their weapons work and what little bit we see of the battle in this issue, I'm 100% sure that it's just Brainiac. There's a couple of changes to Kara as well, as she wasn't a teenager when she got sent off world and then knocked into, you know, the other dimension, which kind of kept her the same age. Here we find out that she too was a baby, and obviously she is going to have grown in the interim to when we see her being sent off world to when they pick her up. But it's quite interesting that they're seemingly keeping Kal and Kara roughly the same age this time round. At least that's what I assumed from this, and from what I've seen of Supergirl growing up and everything. She looks a little bit older than the Supergirl you usually get when you start a Supergirl story, so I think that's quite intriguing, and I'm looking forward to seeing what type of dynamic that brings to both Kal and Kara. Amanda Waller, Deathstroke, and Damage soon arrive at the ship in the Arctic and look for new weapons for Task Force X. Damage is a surprising inclusion since he's kind of a newer creation from that weird dark age of DC time where the Terrifics and all those characters from, basically the time where at Marvel they weren't doing stuff like Fantastic Four and the original Hulk wasn't really around, so then DC kind of more or less stole those ideas and did them themselves. You know, the Terrifics were basically the Fantastic Four and Damage was basically the Hulk, and here he is basically that as well. He hulks out into this giant guy with big metal arms to fight Superman as the Heavy for the first episode, and it's pretty great. I kind of like that they're not even bothering with like giving him that much of a backstory. They know what his role is. He's the big guy who hits Superman around, and they play to that strength throughout the entire episode, and it's great. After stopping Waller from getting any of the kryptonite, Superman learns from his father that his cousin can be found with a beacon, shown what the beacon will look like, so he's got something to sort of set his mind on as a mission for the episodes coming up. But it doesn't end there, as we get a couple more hints at what's to come as Slade manages to get some, kryptonite on his weapons that he's able to give to Waller, and the masked alien we've seen throughout the first season is causing more destruction on a far off planet, and I kind of think I actually know who that is. I'm not going to say who it is. I probably did in some of my first season reviews, but I'm not going to say here for any new listeners because it's a kind of a big spoiler. But I'm very much looking forward to a new Kryptonian villain coming into the scene at some point this season. All of this seems like quite a bit of serious and heavy stuff with, action and intrigue and tense scenes. The episode does have some comedic elements to it, of course, since it's also Valentine's Day and there's a lot of pressure on Clark to make his first Valentine's with Lois special. There's lots of great early scenes with him in the bullpen and having to deal with people like Cat Grant who want him to throw, extravagant parties and all sorts of stuff for him. And I like that that becomes a running gag through the entire episode. Even Jor-El gets in on it and thinks that he needs to do something bombastic since he did something similar with his wife Lara. There is also an absolutely fantastic deep cut joke related to the god-awful poem Lois writes Superman in the first Superman movie, and it's so fantastic that only me and 4 other people might actually get, but it just shows that these writers actually care about this character, and to do a deep cut like that you have to actually know what that is and where it comes from and everything. That's not something you can just pick off a whiteboard, so hats off to the writers for including a joke like that. Of course, Lois doesn't really go in for any sort of big extravagant stuff and likes the little things, like at the start of the episode Clark left her sleeping on her desk and he got her a coffee because he knows she's going to wake up wanting one, and by the end of the episode they have this really great moment together in the clouds watching the northern lights, and it's the best Valentine's gift ever that Lois could ever have. It's a really great way to end off the first episode and begin the new season. Episode 2, titled My Adventures with My Girlfriend, shifts gears ever so slightly, at least in the first half of the episode, to focus a little bit more on Waller as she sets up shop under Stryker's Island Penitentiary and is trying to get the captured Sam Lane to talk. But the hardened military man refuses to, even to his old friend. Lois and Clark, meanwhile, are put onto the trail of what's going on in Stryker's by a young boy named Billy, whose father volunteered at the prison library and went missing there recently with a bunch of other inmates and people who volunteered. This episode really highlights a lot of the stuff I love about Superman. We have Superman who hears from a child that his father is missing and, immediately wants to help without hesitation. And he'll even go so far to help people who actually want to hurt or even kill him, like Sam Lane. The episode also hones in on Lois and Clark's work dynamic, which we've been getting really great bits out throughout the first season, and it looks like they're going to continue in this season. They're off being investigative reporters looking into what's going on in Stryker's Island, and I love the dynamic of Lois already knowing that Clark is Superman so early, so she does things like willingly throws herself down an elevator shaft to force them to continue their investigation, knowing full well that Clark will catch her. I do feel, however, that's kind of like a Chekhov's fall situation, where she'll do it one time and, he'll catch her and he'll keep doing it. Then she'll do it another time and he won't be there to save them and someone else will have to, or something will happen, and maybe that could lead to more, multiversal shenanigans or something like they did in the first season. But I definitely think there's something being set up there because it's really focused on a little too much in this episode where she relies on Superman a little bit too much, and I think that's going to come back in a couple of episodes. Superman and Lois eventually get into the secret lead-lined facility Waller is running under the prison, and Clark finds the beacon Jor-El told him about that could save his cousin. However, them breaking in was all part of Waller's plan, and she unleashes the atomic skull onto Superman. Again, like Damage in the first episode, Skull is a great heavy of the week for Superman to battle, and it seems they are tapping into more of his rogues gallery this time round than in the first season. Since in the first season there were other villains that would show up, like Heatwave, who obviously aren't a Superman villain but sort of expanded the world a little bit, whereas this time around we're getting more Superman villains or Superman centric characters, which is always a lot of fun, and hopefully we get to see a bit more of the lower tier characters kind of pop up. Like, I'd love to see Prankster pop up again, or someone like Bloodsport, or even like anti-heroes like Gangbuster and people like that. I think that would be really cool to see in animation, especially with the Gangbuster lore where Clark actually was Gangbuster for a little bit there when he lost his powers. While traveling through the prison, they find Billy's dad and other inmates, finding that they are all taken because no one would care if they went missing, and Waller is deciding to use them in her experiments to try and create more meta people. So along with reading the comic books, I kinda can't help but feel like there is a little bit of synergy going on here between this TV show and what's happening in the comics right now. So for people who don't know what's happening in the comics right now, Amanda Waller is going to be the big villain in the next big DC summer arc, Absolute Power, which comes out very soon. And she's sort of, masterminding all this stuff to take out all the superheroes, and her being a big part of the show feels a little bit like a synergy there. But I really like how they're portraying her in this show, and I like how they're not sort of pussyfooting around that she is a horrible person and that she is doing these things to just innocent people just really because she can. She has no like government oversight or anything like that. So I kind of like that they're just leaning into the fact that she's a hardcore villain. And I have to wonder whether they will do the backstory like they've been doing in the comics with her, where, her husband was killed and sort of like hardened her and everything. I do like that they have set up her already in this universe as someone who has like had run-ins with aliens thanks to the Kryptonians when she was younger. So I like that there is already sort of a resentment there for alien beings and super powered alien beings, but I'm really interested to see what they're actually going to do with the character going forward, and not just have her be sort of like the mustache twirling villain in the background while Deathstroke and Atomic Skull and Ivo and all of these other people just do her bidding. I'm hoping she gets a little bit more than that than what she has been getting in the comics, which is really just standing around giving orders. Thanks to Sam finding out about this hidden prison, he finally goes fully rogue against Amanda and ends up helping the prisoners and his daughter and Superman escape from the prison, which I thought was a really neat sort of turn for the character, since I fully expected him to kind of go the way of turning back to Waller and maybe helping her in some sort of way. And I mean, he still could actually do that. This could all just be like some sort of big play and he's, a double agent or something. But I do like that he's now, a good guy more or less, which is something that's very difficult for someone like Sam Lane to do, since they never really portray him as that much of a good guy. They portray him as someone who has like his daughter and the Earth's best interest in mind, but he's always doing something kind of evil. And between this and how he's portrayed in Superman and Lois, I think they're finally sort of rehabilitating the character a little bit, and hopefully he can come back in the comics, because in the comics right now he's technically dead. So hopefully they can bring him back as, like a proper good guy. And it also stresses the fact that he's probably going to have to find out that Clark is Superman, since he spends a lot of the episode just berating Clark because obviously Clark's technically not there and sent Lois into danger, and he's really upset at Clark for that. So I have to think they're going to find out about Clark's secret identity very soon, at least, to sort of get around that sort of awkwardness with the characters. The B plot for this episode is a pretty comedic one, with Jimmy being saddled with some new partners for his Flamebird social media, because since the Daily Planet now technically owns it, it needs content constantly. So between him, Steve Lombard, and the Newsboy Legion, they have to try and cover a story, and after much comedic back and forth about trying to buy a boat or playing netball, they get involved in the main plot as Jimmy has to purchase a boat to save Lois, Sam, and the prisoners of Strikers Island after they are cut off. The beginning of Jimmy's story in this episode is also pretty important, as he runs into Alex, Anthony Ivo's assistant from the first season, and in a well-meaning interaction, Jimmy puts Alex on a path to carve out his own future and life. So if it wasn't already blatantly obvious, Alex is Lex Luthor, and by the end of the episode, Lex also has followed up on Jimmy's little pep talk and taken life into his own hands, saving Waller from a crazed Ivo and getting himself a job as her head of science on Task Force X. This is a great swerve for Lex, because it would have been so easy, and he was set up for it to become, the young tech billionaire who then designs a war suit to combat Superman. It was all there, and I like that they've kind of swerved away from it and kind of gone back to how he was originally introduced in the show where he was kind of the one who designed the Amazo suit, and Anthony just kind of took the praise and the glory for it, but he was like the brains behind it all. So he's more of a man of science than a, tech businessman, which Lex has been in the last couple of decades, at least since John Byrne took over the character and kind of turned him into that. I'm excited to see what his plans to defeat Superman are and how exactly he becomes bald this time around, if they actually do end up doing that. And I have to imagine it has to do something with, the kryptonite radiation or an experimental, blow up in his face like it usually does in the comics. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they handle that. The return of My Adventures with Superman was a damn good time. It wrapped up some plot points from the first season and dropped us right into the storyline for season 2, continuing the brilliant characterization of Lois, Clark, Jimmy, Waller, and even teasing an interesting story for the newly arrived Lex Luthor. I'm really looking forward to this season. It has a lot of the hallmarks of something really special. We've got Supergirl coming in, we've got a bunch of new villains showing up, we've got, more Kryptonians showing up in the form of maybe Zod or Ursa or some other, villainous Kryptonians later on in the season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they end up doing all these characters and how different everything will be, because that's the one thing I've really loved about this show, is how they're reinventing old tropes and old characters for the new generation and doing it really respectfully as well. I'm going to give these episodes 9 out of 10, so definitely check them out and check out the first season if you haven't. It's a damn good time.